Welcome to another edition of the Dark Days Dawning podcast. I'm your host, Michael Mulvihill, and today we are going to we're going to analyse the book We by Yevgeny Zamatyn. The 1920s novel, which was a dystopian fictional piece, has inspired other giants of the genre like H.G. Wells, George Orwell, and Aldous Huxley. The absolute dehumanization that is depicted in the novel, in albeit a futuristic setting, would have been absolutely new, the concepts that the author was introducing to this time, to this era. I don't think I know anything more literally signifying of the word that expresses the experience of depersonalization than calling the main character, who's a man, D/50J, and his love interest I/350. It has become a fixture of futuristic novels to name such characters with something that mimics an ISBN code. But Zamatyn was right at the birth of this process. Zamatyn created a world which he called one state, consumed, of course, by the leadership of a benevolent dictator who claimed to have the perfect mathematical formula for utopia. Uneducated, unenlightened, uninformed heathens and aliens still regressed to a lower state of evolution. Well, the one state will attempt to ideologically re-educate these alien beings. Failing that, they'll resort to arms to help change their savage minds. Absolute obedience is structurally reinforced in one state. Members are unified in blind conformity, obliged as they are by compliance, reinforced as it is with mandatory ideological education. In such an environment of absolute internalized control, where people are expected to have identical clothing and collective sharing of ideological thought, internalized control over one's inner mentations are absolutely required, because any rebellion against absolutionist authority is just not possible. To quote Yevgeny Zamatyn in his book We, "Your mission is to subjugate the grateful yoke of reason, the unknown beings who live on other planets and who are perhaps still in the primitive state. If they will not understand that we are bringing them a mathematically faultless happiness, our duty will be to force them to be happy. But before we take up arms, we shall try the power of words." End quote. Whomever feels most capable must consider it his duty to write treatises, poems, manifestos, odes, and other compositions on the greatness and beauty of the one state. Now I can see the scalding hot water that Yevgeny Zamatyn was throwing himself into. What he is describing right there is the behaviours and antics not of some crew heading off to outer space to find a bunch of aliens to treat as unwashed primitives and either enslave or do what colonialists and imperialists do best, commit a mass genocide, no doubt. This will do fine down on Earth. The Soviets did this exactly. They either displaced entire populations or killed them off. Or like we saw with countless ex-Soviet socialist republics, they took over the population. They deemed what members of the population were considered anti-ideological filth, class enemies, and who were deemed ideologically unsound, who must be re-educated. What Zamatyn is doing in his book, We, is of course different to what another author who I think is brilliant, who writes dystopian fiction, Platonov, would do in his book Shevan and the Foundation Pit. Platonov brings you straight into the remotest parts of the USSR, and he openly draws on biting satire, wit, and sarcasm to inform the reader about the new worldview of the Bolshevik revolutionary project. Zamatyn does things differently. One State Republic is in outer space. It's basically an inverted version of the USSR. Locked in Zamatyn's description of the dance seems to be what exactly communist ideologues have in mind. Every godforsaken time they had these coordinated dances in the GDR or in any other of its republics or client states, when we'd see their organised demonstrations and parades filled with slogans, banners. Of course, these excessively choreographed dances were all controlled dances. Zamatyn describes these prescribed, authorized by top-down authority, as ideal non-freedom, unfree movement. It's the expression he uses. It's an inverted logic, a classical reframe, and a vivid reassignment of our conclusions. The bird in the cage, it would seem, like the wild animal in the zoo, is perfectly happy in their confined artificial environment. The dance, to quote Zamatyn, is contained in its absolute ecstatic submission, in its ideal freedom. End quote. More than just the plot, when I'm reading fiction or non-fiction, I love what I'm reading to be a source of food for thinking. This is exactly the case with my reading of We. It is more obvious to find resonance in Zamatyn's words when applied to totalitarianism. However, we find the same strangulation of freedom expressed in the deified pop star whose mesmerized fans flock to concerts. Even ancient dance, be that Aboriginal or Native American, that seems wild and uncontained, is controlled by a non-freedom as its dancers go into a collective unconscious rhythm whose ritualistic memory is recalled and triggered by the sound and rhythm, which gets the body into recalled movement of their ancient most ancestors. The one state of Zamatyn, We, has created the ahistorical detached humanity that has dissected the business of love and romance into permitted sexual days. That's right, you heard it here. Before there was George Orwell's 1984, you got the infrastructure of this world building. The Bolshevik vision of destroying religion is also embodied in D50J. Quote, I myself had made a victory over the old God and old life, that I myself had created all this. End quote. The entirety of One State is set up as an antithesis to freedom. One State is a glass structure city made entirely of glass, a place that enables total surveillance. One State, of course, has colonial ambitions to outer space in the form of the integral, which is a spaceship under construction. The government of one state are sure of themselves and their capacity as rulers and masters of the universe, bringing the perfect mathematical formula of how people are to live their life. Be obedient, be compliant, be conformist. Never be difficult. Put your opinions in the bin. If one state had an anthem, its lyrics would read exactly like that. One state also glorifies the sedentary lifestyle. Zamatyn writes, quote, "Does it not follow that the most sedentary form of life, ours, is at the same time the most perfect? I admit that humanity acquired this habit of a sedentary form of life, not without difficulty and not all at once." End quote. This reminds me of the 2008 film from Pixar Animation Studios, WALL-E. Humans in this film live in a distant future where they become entirely dependent on technology. The humans have abandoned a filthy planet Earth crushed by pollution. These displaced humans, totally disconnected from their humanity, are reliant on machines for absolutely everything. The humans in a state of total degradation are depicted as overweight, immobile, and detached from their own humanity. They are passive with no meaningful physical activity or connection. Zamatyn's main character is a complicit, fully conformist, absolutely obedient cog in the wheel of one state. As he says himself, quote, "The science of one state does not make mistakes." End quote. All the other states just won't do, he reasons, because they are in an internal state of war. We, in the form of one state, is an embodiment of the hatred the Bolshevik Revolution had towards original artists, writers, novelists, filmmakers, intellectuals, and thinkers. To be sure, people would not be set free from the psychoneuroses that possess their unconscious mind. Psychoanalysis, being condemned as a bourgeois science, was rendered illegal, mimicking the simmering ambience of paranoia which percolated throughout the Soviet Union. Zamatyn's We gaslights originality and creativity. One trio asserts that originality means you stand out from others. To be outstanding, it means to, quote, "You violate the law of equality. To be common, therefore, is only fulfilling of one's day." End quote. One trio's statement, locked in the fictitious one state, is absolutely prophetic. Yevgeny Zamatyn writes, quote, "But we of today, we know that dreaming is a serious mental illness." End quote. We, written in 1920, is a predictive statement of how the USSR will treat writers and artists and poets. These dreamers will be show-trialed and sent off to gulags. Soviet psychiatry will catch up on this Soviet viewpoint and label such people sluggish, schizophrenic. They will be institutionalized and given strong medications. Zamatyn's, no doubt, brainwashed main character repeatedly continues expressing his hatred for freedom. One state is the realization of the Bolshevik dream to euthanize all agency of free will. Yevgeny Zamatyn writes a fantastic paragraph that deserves to be read here. He offers a very jarring synopsis of how he believes freedom was not the original natural state of human beings. In the world of one state, freedom is considered an alloy of criminality. Eliminate freedom, you eliminate criminality. This is exactly the utopian Bolshevik vision. Communist paradise would be a vision of equality without class tension. There would be no more money that would cease to exist. I would freedom of choice. If this was the perfect way of being, why does it sound like slavery? Zamatyn, 1920, wrote, Quote, the world was renovated, it became like steel, men of steel, suddenly an insane man, unchained the free fire and set it free. And again, the world had perished. Unfortunately, I had a bad memory for poetry, but one thing I am sure of, one could not choose more instructive, more beautiful parables, end quote. Undeniably, he is speaking about the globalist revolution that Bolshevism represents, a dogged belief in its perfect system, which must be spread the length and breadth of the world. Zamatyn knows this bold mentality in all its craziness, that at once it glorifies the ordinary worker, or to illustrate via Zamatyn, our gods are here below, they are with us in the bureau, in the shops, in the restrooms. Of course, this is a picture of what communism was aiming for, whilst dishing out rewards to ordinary people doing ordinary, mundane jobs in factories. A workers' revolution that promised total employment, elimination of the snobrified gentry, where a war on the land-owning property classes would ensue. This so-called brave new world, to quote a Huxley expression, will be symbolised in brutal architecture, communal living, the greater filth of the commune blocks, whilst the sordid, stomach-churning consequences of this class warfare will certainly not have been known by Zamatyn's future decades of readers and writers. They will obviously evolve this theme. Returning to the sentence we left Zamatyn in his next sentence, he moves on to show the true ideological insanity of communism, Bolshevik communism, a deified humanity that had achieved a paradise on earth. Zamatyn's character displays an eerie lack of self-consciousness. Quote, the gods have become like us, ergo, we have become like gods. Of course, it is clear now what is located at the heart of Bolshevik psychiatry and their fictional mental illness that labels so many dreamers, artists, writers, and creative people as sluggish schizophrenics. Projectionism. Soviet psychiatry felt so compelled to label others who may challenge the Soviet system insane, so they could not look inside of themselves and see just how crazy their system was. This great republic for workers that had transformed its citizens to gods must now spread their way of life. To quote, and we shall come to you, my unknown readers, on another planet. We shall make your life as godlike, as rational, as correct as our own. Will Zamatyn's main character begin to see one state for what it truly is, like countless millions who did throughout the vast heritage of Soviet socialist republics, bringing on glasnost and perestroika? That is for you to go and read. I've been your host, Michael Mulvihill, and it was a pleasure educating you today about the writer Yevgeny Zamatyn and his novel, written in 1920, called We. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Dark Days Dawning podcast.